Alright guys, welcome back to another Master and Apprentice video and podcast. As you guys can see, we've got another book review. Today we've got the last book in the Thrawn trilogy, Thrawn Treason. So with this book in mind, it was kind of already announced that after this book was finished, they were going to be heading into the Thrawn Ascendancy trilogy. So we knew this wasn't necessarily the end of Thrawn's story, and that they were going to be writing more novels about the Chiss Ascendancy. But it did kind of wrap up his time in the Empire, as we see kind of the beginning of this book. It's right before his end in Rebels, right? Like right before Kanan dies and he's off planet on Lothal. So it kind of all ties in with the Rebel series. As we'll see later on, it has some ties to his past as well as the future with the Chiss Ascendancy. So first things first, this is definitely connected to the last book, Thrawn Alliances. So if you haven't read Thrawn Alliances, reading Thrawn Treason might confuse you a little bit. And if you haven't read the original Thrawn 2017 novel, characters like Eli Mantel would also probably confuse you. So you definitely want to read the other first two. That's kind of one of the first things to keep in mind with this novel, that it's not a standalone. It definitely is built off of the first two in the series. The second thing is there's kind of two different stories going on here, similar to Thrawn Alliances. You've got the Chiss and Grisk story, and you also have the Imperial story with Krennic, Savi, and Tarkin, and the Death Star. So you got kind of two different stories going on, but they in the end kind of connect. So it starts off with Thrawn kind of making a bet with Tarkin and Admiral Savi and Director Krennic that he can't solve a problem in the Outer Rim with Krennic's supply line kind of keep getting raided. And so they figure it out. Long story short, there's a lot of like mysterious problem solving and all of this. And it kind of, one of my first pointers against it is it's kind of boring, right? I feel like a lot of this investigating stuff overshadows some of the cool stuff with the Chiss and the Empire and the Star Destroyer stuff that we want to look at and we want to see, the Death Star stuff. But I feel like a lot of this investigation stuff kind of is just a little boring, and that's just my honest opinion. But I don't think it takes away from it too much, because the rest of the stuff with the Empire is pretty interesting. With Ronan, kind of playing by Thrawn's side and always questioning being a super annoying character, but he was written that way, and I think he was by the end a relatively interesting character and a good character that was brought in. Someone like Savi kind of reminds me of something that would have been in the Legends Thrawn series. Someone who was trying to outsmart Thrawn. Someone who was similar to Night Swan in the first Thrawn, but very similar. So all of it was pretty good and interesting for the Imperial stuff, but it was kind of the step before the Chiss part. The Chiss Ascendancy and the Grisk story is a much bigger factor in the story overall. As we can see, Thrawn's trying to solve his problems with the Chiss, but also solve his problems with the Empire at the same time. That's kind of the main point of this story. But they end up overlapping, and it doesn't really leave a great taste in Palpatine's mouth. He kind of is upset with Thrawn because of this. But Thrawn's kind of trying to turn it into this problem is the Chiss's problem, but it will be the Empire's problem eventually, right? So he's trying to say we're being preventive or being proactive with trying to stop this problem. And overall, it was pretty good. I enjoyed. I'd say my favorite part about this is the Chiss, Captain Arlani, Eli Vanto, the Chiss navigators, and like how they view the Force and the Force sensitive. All of that stuff I find to be like the most interesting. And the Imperial stuff and the relationship between Thrawn, Tarkin, and Krennic is also very interesting, but it plays really a minor role throughout the story. And then Palpatine and his problem and his relationship with Thrawn and Thrawn's loyalties to Palpatine and the Empire. That stuff's the most interesting, but it's really, kind of sometimes overshadowed by the Chiss stuff. And that's not always bad, but again, we kind of knew coming into this, we were getting a lot more on the Chiss Ascendancy in the Thrawn Ascendancy book. So we were hoping to get more Empire stuff and get that more wrapped up, especially because we just don't really get a lot of Thrawn and the Empire in established canon. We have a decent amount in Legends, but not a lot in canon, to be honest, because he wasn't even in the full Rebel series. He was only in like 2 or 3 seasons, 2.5 seasons. So I think overall it's a pretty good book. What would you rate it out of
Uh,
10?
I think I want to give it a 7. It was definitely above just an average book that I don't want to read again. If I go through books that I want to read again through Star Wars, and I read this trilogy, I'm definitely going to be happy to read this again. I like the Chiss part the most too, and I do enjoy watching Thrawn just outsmart his opponent. But Sammy's right. After the first two books of that being pretty much the entire point, like obviously not the entire point, but a lot of the first two books are just filled up with Thrawn outsmarting his opponents. It almost gets old to the point where it's still a fun thing to see where he's just playing chess with these people. But if you've seen our past couple reviews, that's like the best thing I've said about the past two books, which is something I love about it, but it gets old. I like how much Thrawn is with his TIE Defender project, saying how it's much more important than Operation Stardust with the Death Star and all this, because Death Star is one thing and TIE Defenders, a fleet can do a lot more than one weapon. I like his argument there, and Empire part of this, there's just a lot of high level corruption, which really isn't too surprising to see in a dark side led empire.
I'm, I'm not gonna lie. Sometimes when you read something, you have to go back and read it again because you kind of forget. Or if you're listening to it, you have to go back and listen to it again. If you're listening on audiobooks, because you kind of zone out. But if a book makes you do that multiple times, it's not your fault. It's the book's fault. It's not captivating enough. And Thrawn Alliances did that multiple times, and Thrawn Treason did that multiple times. Not as many as Alliances, though. It just, I guess, I'm trying to say is the investigating part and all the mystery solving part just became a little too much sometimes. We're not trying to read a mystery novel. We're not trying to read an investigation novel. We're trying to read a novel on an admiral in the Empire. We want to learn about his tactics in the battles and the war. When he had his TIE defenders in battle, or when they were invading the Grisk ships, that was some of the coolest parts in these books, right? When they were explaining things about Chiss culture, that was some of the cool stuff about this book. The investigating part stuff got old eventually. It worked in the first Thrawn book because that's kind of an establishing book of the character. But we're past that point. We don't need to know how smart Thrawn is. We know how smart he is. And I think that they kind of just built on a little too much in this book. Not as bad as Thrawn Alliance, but again, just a little too much for my liking. I would have to agree. I think I'd give it a 7 out of 10. It reminds me a lot of the Tarkin and the Rogue One Catalyst book with a lot of like that investigating, mysterious, problem solving stuff with these really smart, intelligent leaders in the Empire. So I would probably put it close to those books, honestly. If we go ahead and plug this into our book tier list, we've got S, A, B, C, D. S, we've got Dark Disciple, Thrawn 2017 novel, and the Bloodline book. And then A, we have Dooku and Tarkin. I would probably put it behind Tarkin. Just because I think the investigating and the character establishment and building in Tarkin is more meaningful because it's a standalone book, and so you kind of want some of that with that. Whereas Thrawn Treason, it's not, and in fact, it's kind of the opposite. It's trying to cap off a story. It's trying to cap off the story of Thrawn in general because this is also around the last time we see Thrawn. Because right after this Thrawn book ends, he goes into the Rebel series, and then he's taken into the Outer Rim, where we haven't heard or seen from him for many years until the Ahsoka series that came out in 2023. So with all those things in mind, I think I put it at the bottom of A. Where would you plug it?
I think I'd actually 100% agree with the bottom of A or top of B, and I think bottom of A fits more because I'm just enjoying these Thrawn books a lot, and I like seeing the character. And they added this Force sensitivity thing into this Thrawn trilogy with how the Chiss view the Force differently. I mean, there's not really much I can bash about this book. I like it all. The one thing I like the least about the book is we're getting more of the investigation part than we are getting the Chiss background part. And I mean, they're both good parts. We're just tired of the investigation part by the third book.
Yeah, and I will say this reminded me of like reading one of the original Thrawn legend books or any of the legend books really, where it was trying to establish a new thing outside of the Sith, a new thing outside of the black and white bad guy and good guy in Star Wars, right? Where it's trying to bring something new in with the Chiss and the Grisk, and I really enjoyed that part of this. Unfortunately, it didn't establish it too much because it knew it was going to be going into that with the Chiss and the Thrawn Ascendancy books, which I'm excited to read because this got me excited for them. But it got me excited for them at the expense of this trilogy, in my opinion. But it's still a great book, though, and I think it's a good series. I just think, unfortunately, the series starts off with the best book, and then it dips down, then it gets a little bit better. But it definitely, its best book, I think, is the first novel, the 2017 Thrawn novel. So, yeah, bottom of A. That leaves us again with the list S, A, B, C, D. A now being Dooku, then Tarkin, now Thrawn, Treason, and then B being Ahsoka, Brotherhood, and then Thrawn Alliances, and then C being A New Dawn, and then D empty. So there you guys go. Let us know if you guys agree, disagree, how you guys thought of the book, if you've read it. Yeah, let us know what you guys want us to read next, review next, and we'll see you guys next. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe, and we'll see you guys later.
Peace.